and welcome to this episode of the All Things Books Show. What I've got in store for you today is we're going to look at why do authors change a book cover, and in particular, why have I just changed book covers for my Carlos Jacobi series. So let's get on with it.
Welcome to the All Things Books Show, hosted by award-winning best-selling mystery author Dawn Brookes. Publishing has changed beyond recognition in recent years. Join Dawn as she interviews authors, narrators, and many more from across the creative community. This inspiring and informative show is for readers and writers.
So the first thing is, why would an author change their book cover? Well, there are a number of reasons for this. I mean, the first and most obvious is if the author has changed publisher and the publisher decides to give it their own branding and publish their own cover. So that's one reason. Another reason might be to do with an author who was published by a publisher and has now chosen to go independent, and they want to put their own branding on a cover, and maybe they didn't have much input into the cover in the first place and never liked it. So that's another reason why an author might change the cover. It might be to do with lack of sales on a cover. So, for instance, most authors and publishers nowadays have to advertise books, and one of the things we get are clicks on an ad. If nobody is clicking on an ad that's being shown a lot, there might be an issue with cover. It might just be because the first thing most readers see is cover and title, and usually they click because they think the cover matches something that they'd be interested in reading. So if they're getting lots of impressions but no clicks, it could be that the advertising is wrong and that they are advertising to the wrong audience who won't click on a cover like that. Or more likely, it's because the cover looks maybe self-made or just isn't doing it for them. So that might be another reason. Another reason could be that they're getting lots of clicks on the ads, so people love the cover, but when they get to the sales page, they're not buying. Now that might be that the blurb isn't right, the sales blurb, the bit that you read at the beginning, or it might be that there's a mismatch between the cover and the blurb, and the two need to be brought into line, and the author has to decide, is it the blurb that needs tweaking or is it the cover that needs changing? Another reason is that, like everything, covers come in and out of fashion, and it might be that a cover that was working a few years ago, 5 years ago, isn't working anymore because the cover design for that particular genre has moved on, and a more modern cover is required. So it could just be fashion. Another reason could be that initially, particularly maybe with an independent author, they couldn't really afford to hire a cover designer or hired one on the cheap and used perhaps stock images, or maybe not even stock images, maybe just because lots of publishers also use stock images, but they may have sort of designed it themselves or even used Amazon's own cover design templates, which are fine for when you're starting out, but as things progress and maybe the author's got a little bit more money, so they want to invest in a new cover. It might be that the author wants to advertise their backlist and want to bring it back into fashion and modern day, give it a boost, and so they decide to go right through the whole of the covers for a particular backlist or series and redesign the covers. And this isn't to cheat the reader. This isn't about telling the reader who's already bought the book, look, buy this book again, because that would work negatively. In fact, they'd get very bad reviews. It's not to to try and deceive the reader. It's just because the cover is no longer working as well as it should. And then I'm sure there are other reasons that I might have forgotten, but I want to come on to why I changed mine. And the main reason is because my covers didn't fit with the genre or the content of the book. And I'll show you why, and I'll show you in more detail later when I show you the before and after. But this is a before of Body in the Woods. Now, that screams out thriller, maybe even dark thriller, and you might be expecting sort of a lot more gore than is in the book. Now, the book is a crime fiction novel. It is definitely a murder mystery. It's not cosy in the sense of lots of humour, but it is cosy in terms of language and content. In other words, there is no sex, there's no violence. And later on in this video, I'll read the first chapter and explain what would be different in that chapter if it were a noir thriller or a dark mystery. But it isn't a dark mystery, so I've decided, I'll hold my hands up. Recently I had a conversation with a publisher who suggested that actually I'd get more read-through from my cozy mystery readers to this particular series if the covers not matched the cozy series in the sense that look really cozy and funny and humorous, because also that would be wrong, but matched what a little bit more the contents of the book. And I hope in the end of this video, when I show you in a minute, when I show you the before and after, you'll agree with me. So that's why I decided to change these two covers. There's only 2 books in that series so far, with a third planned for next year, and the third will match these 2 covers. So it's just so that I'm not, so that readers aren't getting confused, thinking that they're going to get a darker read than the book actually is, but without moving away from crime fiction, which is what the book is. It is definitely a crime fiction novel, and is a little bit more, has some degree of menace and grit that the cozies don't necessarily have, but at the same time there's no swearing, no graphic content of any description in terms of the murders, and no explicit sex or anything like that. So just so that readers aren't confused, I've decided to change the covers. I mean, tell me in the comments if you think, well, actually I wouldn't have thought that contained a lot of gore and violence, but I sort of suspect that you would think it's going to be a darker read than it actually is. And this hasn't come up necessarily in reviews, but it has come up in terms of who buys the book. So in other words, I want people who like a good clean read and a good sort of Agatha Christie type mystery, Poirot type mystery, to be able to pick up the Carlos Jacobi series with absolute confidence that they're not going to get something that it isn't. So that's why. So I'm just going to read you the first chapter. It is quite short, so bear with me. 50 years of marriage, and he'd not once been late for a meal. Meg stared wearily through the window. The streetlights blinked on the pavement, and the darkening sky now reflected her mood. She paced the floor for the umpteenth time, finding herself once more at the back of the lounge dining room. Her trembling hands hovered over the 2 cold dinners, neatly placed on decorated table mats. Should I clear them away? What would he say if he found cold food on the table? She shook, not knowing what to do. Where are you, Harold? The empty walls ignored her quietly spoken, tremulous words. 7, and the cuckoo burst from her husband's clock, screaming loud and incessant, making her jump. Tears burned the back of her eyes. Anxiety threatened to overwhelm her. "Don't cry, Meg. Crying gets us nowhere." She imagined her husband's sharp voice chastising her, as he always did whenever she showed a trace of emotion. But where was he? If only he would chastise her now. She snatched at the phone for the second time, desperate to call the police, but then remembered the dismissive voice of the desk sergeant she had spoken to earlier. Was it only 2 hours since she'd placed hot dinners on the table? Only 1 hour since she had called the police? Harold Sissons was never late. She'd explained this to the sergeant after insisting she was put through to someone in authority following a conversation with a girl whose disinterest had caused Meg to raise her voice, something she never did. The sergeant had responded with the same degree of condescension as the girl who had answered before him. "Look, madam, he's only been missing for an hour. That hardly constitutes late as my book." To make matters worse, he'd laughed, clearly not understanding her distress. When she hadn't responded to his inappropriate attempt at humour, he'd sighed and continued. "He's probably stopped by the shops, gone to the pub, dropped in at the bookies. We live in a village, and my husband doesn't gamble, Sergeant, and he wouldn't go to the pub without letting me know, or to the shops for that matter." Or would he? She thought. "You keep him on a tight leash, then?" The sergeant's tone infuriated Meg. "Sergeant, my husband is missing. Do you hear me? He hasn't come home. His dinner's gone cold on the table, and I'm telling you, he is never late." "Have you tried calling him?" "Of course I have." "You stupid man," remained unsaid. The tension in her hand as she gripped the phone tighter translated into her voice, and her head ached as she fought to remain calm. "He's left his mobile phone behind. He must have forgotten it." "And is that out of character?" "Yes, it is, as a matter of fact." Meg tried to control a cold chill sitting on her stomach. "There you are then. He's having an out-of-character day. He'll come home soon, I'm sure." Meg detected the smug tone in his triumphant explanation and wasn't sure whether she could also hear a girl giggling in the background. "He will not!" She was shouting for the second time in a matter of minutes. The anger caused her to shake. "I mustn't lose control. Harold wouldn't like that." The sergeant had briefly hesitated. She imagined him weighing up whether she was a lunatic or whether to take her seriously. "Madam, why don't you ring round his friends and ask if they know where he is? Someone will have seen him. Do you have any family you can call?" "I'm not acquainted with my husband's friends. He would have been at the community centre this afternoon for their weekly lecture, and then he would have come straight home. As for my daughter and son-in-law, they have a lot on their plates presently. I can't call them." She neglected to say that her daughter hadn't spoken to her father in 20 years. "The only thing I can suggest for now is that you phone the local hospitals in case he's been involved in an accident. If he doesn't come home later, give me a call back and I'll send someone round to get a description. I'm sure he'll turn up." The sergeant's tone had turned more serious, and she was grateful that he'd finally got the message. After ending the call, she had phoned all the local hospitals, but her husband had not been admitted to any of them. She deliberated walking up to the village church to find the vicar, who would have seen Harold that afternoon, but she knew Harold wouldn't like that. He'd think she was checking up on him. Should she call the vicar's wife? She was always kind. As Meg stared again at the telephone in her hand, she wondered if an hour constituted later. What the heck? She dialed the number, asking to be put through to the desk sergeant. While she was waiting for the police to arrive, a feeling of dread caused her to go light-headed as she sat beside the window, staring out into the dark, wintry night once more. So that's the initial chapter, and I think, or I feel, that if that were a darker mystery, there would have been some swearing, either internal swearing that she might not have actually sworn at the desk sergeant or his assistant, but internally she would have been swearing. Obviously, we wouldn't expect the police to swear at her, but I think that to set the tone of a book and its language, the internal dialogue is as important as the external dialogue. And in this instance, Meg's internal dialogue, although she's upset, she's frantic with worry, she's depressed and frightened, and you get a hint here of what might come out later. Some of the hints about the relationship between Meg and her husband, Harold. Although you get that hint of some menace and what will come out later, which I won't go into too much because I'll leave that to your imagination. But you get a hint of that, but there's no bad language, not even in her internal dialogue. So that's why I have chosen in this instance to change the covers of this book, and here are the new covers. I've also changed the cover of the second book, which is equally along the same lines, although there's murders, there's intent, there's menace, there's some anxiety, some tension, but all that is dealt with in a clean, what I call a clean read, without bad language and without graphic violence. So I hope you understand the difference, and I hope you understand that that's why I've changed the covers, and I'm hoping that readers who read my other series of cozy mysteries will be reassured that these also are clean reads. And speaking of these books, they are available in ebook, paperback, large print and audiobook. So the Carlos Jacobi print mysteries can be found in all of those formats. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. I'll be back next week with another episode where I interview a lady who specialises in marketing, and we'll be talking about branding the author and not the book. I hope you enjoyed it. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel if you want to hear more of this type of thing, and I'll see you next time. Thank you for watching.